We are back, and again, we appreciate you being with us. Very excited to welcome to the show now Tania Luna. She is a writer, a podcast host, and more importantly, she is a thinker. She is researching and educating how we should act, how we should be better leaders, and how we should operate our lives in many different facets. She runs a company called LifeLabs Learning, and they have helped hundreds of thousands of people at some of the best companies out there like Reddit and JetBlue and Tinder, helped people there become more confident, competent, and compassionate. Her podcast blends humor and psychology to help people be better at what they do. And she has a TED Talk out there, which talks about her experience as a Ukrainian immigrant. She has a new book out called The Leader Lab, Core Skills to Become a Great Manager Faster. And it has over 70 five-star reviews on that website called Amazon. You don't get more than that. It's pretty impressive. Tania, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great after that intro. I have nothing more to add. Thank you.
World-renowned lover. All right. Tell us about the Leadership Lab and how do you find out what people are doing well and what they're doing poorly? How do you know? I mean, there's not a gauge to put on my forehead to say, he's a 27. He's not compassionate enough as a leader. How do you even know these things?
Yeah, I love that question. That's what we started with. So the Leader Lab, the book that you mentioned, is based on the research that we've done at my company, LifeLabs Learning. And Leanne Renninger, who's my co-founder there, both of us, our background is in psychology and in research, but it was not by any means in leadership or management. So we went into the world of leadership research very naively, which I think served us because we didn't have any preconceived notions around what is a good leader, what would put that gauge on your forehead that tells people that you're effective. So what we did instead is we asked the organizations that we were working with to nominate managers and leaders who were most effective based on the scores they got and their evaluations from their teams and their peers and their own managers, as well as the results of those teams. And we also looked at the folks who were average. And what we started off doing was just asking them, hey, what do you think you're doing? Turns out it didn't work. Most people who are really good or quite average don't actually know what it is that sets them apart. So the heart of our research was actually observing what these people were physically doing so that we can pluck out what we call behavioral units. What are the specific behaviors that are differentiated among the leaders and managers that are effective versus those that are average? That was our methodology.
Okay. And what were some of the BUs?
You want to know the results? Yes. So we noticed two things. One is that there were these, BUs, behavioral units, these tiny micro behaviors. And then there were sort of these bundles of behaviors that we think of as skills. So skills are kind of like driving a car, whereas a BU is like, checking your rear view mirror correctly. I always worry when I start using car metaphors, by the way, because I can't drive. But from what I understand, you're supposed to check your rear view mirror correctly. Is that right? Is that one of the BUs of driving?
Hey, if you're obsessed with what's behind you, a lot of us don't even have rear view mirrors because we're just obsessed.
Check your mirrors. Check your mirrors in general. It's like a BU, whereas driving, is a skill. So, for example, one of the BUs that we found is something that we like to call cue stepping, which is defaulting to a question. So when we study what these great leaders were physically doing differently, we got a chance to sit in on their one-on-one meetings, to watch their boardroom meetings, to watch their team all-hands meetings. And we were noticing one of the behaviors again and again was that someone would come to them with a problem, with a complaint, with a concern, sometimes even a question. And their first step would be to ask a question, even if it's as simple as, what are your thoughts on that? Or what have you tried so far? That's one example. Another example is what we call deblurring. So these great leaders, particularly in times of change and uncertainty, we studied a lot of leaders who worked in remote and hybrid workplaces, even pre-pandemic. We found that deblurring was a super important BU, behavioral unit, which is essentially training yourself to notice any word that could mean different things to different people. So if I say, we should scale this project, they wouldn't go, yeah, let's scale it. They'd go, well, what does scaling mean to you? How would we measure that? How might we know that we have scaled this effectively? Particularly when things are moving fast, when you're working cross-culturally, when you're working remotely, just so much miscommunication happens. And then you have to mop that up later. And it costs so much time and effort and energy. And these great leaders were deblurring all over the place. And then when we look at skills, we notice that those kind of micro behaviors stack together into entire skill bundles. So for example, people who are really good at giving feedback are really good at cue stepping and deblurring, as an example. So that's really like, we just nerded out over not, what's the philosophy behind it, or what's the theory behind it, or what do people think it takes to be a great leader, but what are we seeing when we actually look at the specific behaviors of these people?
Interesting. By actually observing instead of guessing, you were able to come up with it. So how many important BUs did you identify in the end? 8, 10 of them?
Close. So we got to 7. We saw lots of other ones, but if we just looked again and again, we literally would just track which were the ones that we noticed again and again and again and again. And there were 7 that came up over and over and over. And then when it comes to skills, we got to 8, what we call tipping point skills. We call them tipping point skills because once you get good at, say, feedback, it tips over into all these other skills. Like if you're better at giving feedback, you're a better negotiator, you're better at resolving conflict, you're better at clear communication internally and externally. So we got to 7 behavioral units, BUs, and 8 tipping point skills. And those are all in the book. And those are the things that we teach through our workshops at LifeLabs Learning.
All right. Are all of these things teachable? For example, I don't think you can teach someone to be honest.
Oh,
can you
gosh.
teach someone to be honest?
So, well, it's an interesting question because we certainly, even if you think about how we try to raise our kids and try to, encourage people to act in society, we certainly act like these things are teachable. I would say, maybe I'll give you like a 3-part answer if it's okay. So I would say, number 1, all of these skills are teachable in that every single person we work with, we saw improvement in those skills. We also do follow-up studies 6 months, 1 year, and even 3 years later. And we find that over 90% of people say they're still applying the tools that they learned and they're seeing results. They're better at their jobs. We've also done studies that found that their direct reports and their manager agree that they've seen a change. So all of these things are teachable in the same way that like learning to play the piano is teachable. So 2 caveats though of my 3-part answer. Number 2 is not everyone is going to be as good at it as the person who is best at it. In the same way as we can, almost all of us, if we have the mechanical ability, can learn to play the piano, but some of us will go on to become experts at it, and some of us will just be pretty good. So you need practice, you need feedback, you need, the specificity of what you're trying to get better at. Just like, you shouldn't expect someone to get better at playing the piano if you just say, go ahead, be better at it. Inspire us with your music. That doesn't work. So if you break it down to the specific behaviors, if you help people practice, if you help people reflect, if you give people feedback, you see everyone makes progress. Some people seem to be either more talented at it than others. Maybe the way they were socialized makes them, maybe they got secret practice in these skills that, they didn't even realize they were getting as kids. So there is difference in skill. But then the third thing I would say that I get really excited about thinking about and helping organizations improve is it's not just skills, it's the conditions and the environment that you create. So for example, you mentioned, can you teach people to be honest? I don't know specific research on whether you can teach honesty skills, but what I do know is that you can create conditions that either increase the likelihood that people are honest or decrease the likelihood that people are honest. For example, if you create a high trust culture where individuals are given a lot of space to make their own decisions and use their judgment, they're more likely to be honest. That's one kind of condition you can control. Some other kind of quirky ones are like, if you say, I expect you to be an honest person, or don't be a cheater, people are much more likely to do the honest thing versus if you say something like, please tell the truth, or please don't cheat. So it's kind of like an identity thing. Or things like, there's research that shows that if you just put eyes in a space where people might steal something, like a picture of eyes, they're less likely to take it. So there's condition. I mean, I know you're just kind of throwing out honesty as an example, but there's so many conditional things we can do in the environment that lead to these positive behaviors or lead to kind of destructive behaviors. So I love talking about the skills, obviously, but also what are the conditions that you're creating within your workplace that help people do the things that you're hoping they'll do. For example, it's much harder to create a feedback culture in places where the structure of the organization makes it easy for anyone to fire you if they don't like what you're saying. No matter how well I am taught to deliver feedback, I'm most likely not going to share it if I believe that the consequences are too high. So that's kind of a conditioned thing that companies and leaders and teams and honestly everyone has an ability to influence so that those skills are more likely to manifest.
All right, can we go through some of the core? Do we do BUs or do we do skills? I think we do skills.
You tell me.
Let's go through some of the skills and teach me something that by myself I can do at home to get better at that.
Okay, I love it.
All right.
So what are you in the mood for? Do you want to do? We can talk coaching.
Let's
can talk feedback.
Let's just go straight through the chapters of the book. So let's start with coaching.
Okay, let's go for coaching skills. All right. So the first thing that I would start with is kind of this cue step. The essence of coaching is asking really high quality questions. And one of the things that we got a chance to research at LifeLabs is just question quantity. When you look at great managers, great influencers, great collaborators versus average, there is something really interesting that we noticed just in the ratio of their questions to statements. So I'm gonna give you a pop quiz. If I were to ask you to guess how many questions an average person asks in a 15-minute interval, it's a one-on-one conversation. You get a chance to just sit there, observe the conversation. How many questions would you guess the typical person asks in a 15-minute interval?
Ooh, not that many. I'm going to say 4.
4? Okay, very good guess. Survey says 2. 2 questions on average. Oh. So that's something we found in our own research. It's actually very similar to other research conducted on salespeople, negotiators, influencers. So on average, people ask about 2 questions in a 15-minute interval. Now let's go to the greats, the people who are most effective, most influential. Our research was on managers and teams. Very similar research has been done on negotiators and salespeople. What's your guess? 15-minute interval. How many questions for the people who are particularly good? 1 a minute. Oh, okay. So 15 questions. Very close. So 10. Not quite the 1 a minute, although I like how you distributed that out. So 10 questions in a 15-minute interval. That alone is kind of a big aha moment for us, where we started realizing there's something to this questions thing. So may I kind of ask you more questions about questions? Sure. Okay. All right. So my next question, and this is what we ask in our workshop to kind of help people connect with these concepts, is why? What is it about questions that is resulting in people's ability to increase people's effectiveness, engagement, commitment, even retention in the workplace? What would your guess be? You ask questions for a living, so you must know.
Well, it allows people to be more honest. The more you question them, the more eventually the truth will come out, I believe. And it's like the old saying, you give people the rope to hang themselves, right? And so, that is, I think, very true. It's also a better way to learn if they discover it themselves. If all of a sudden they go, oh, I get it, because they've been thinking themselves and the questions forced them into a position of thinking.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what was the question?
I love those. No, I said, why questions? Why are questions so important when it comes to great leadership or management?
Well, also, they're talking and not you. And there's very little good that can come from you talking,
That is sound advice. Yeah.
You're not going to make a mistake if you're being quiet, so, and it makes the other person feel more important, like they're the center of attention. and that they're really being, I'm really thinking about you. I have a question that just relates to what you just said, proves that I'm with you. I'm paying attention to you. And people love to feel like they are being paid attention to.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. You've got so many great insights there. I think first and foremost, to your last point, there's the relationship building component. I love what you also said about honesty. That seems to be a value of yours because maybe it's hard to teach people to be honest, but can you ask the kinds of questions that make it easier for people to open up and be honest? Right? Like maybe if I say, what's in your mind? And I say, nothing much. And that's it. That's the end of the conversation. Well, no, especially if you're in a position of power, maybe you haven't created yet an opportunity for me to be honest. But if you go deeper and you say things like, well, what's one thing that could be better? Or what's one thing that's working for you? Or what's something we haven't tried yet? Or whatever it is. Or even something like, what might you be hesitating to say? So asking those questions can really unlock this depth of relationship and depth of conversation. And then from a management leadership perspective, absolutely, I completely agree with you. And this is what we find in the research. When you get other people thinking, they learn to think, they learn to be better at this thing. That then ideally as a leader, you are doing less and less of the problem solving for those individuals on your team, and you are building up their capacity. So the thing we get excited about at LifeLabs Learning is what we teach an individual, we're not just helping that person get stronger. We're helping them elevate and expand the capacity, the power of the entire organization. Because if I'm able to help my team become more independent, more fast thinking, more creative, more capable of solving whatever challenge comes their way, then we have infinite capability as a team. And then if you zoom out and you've got a whole bunch of teams like that, then it's your entire organization. And so many leaders, often you get promoted because you were a really good problem solver. And then you start trying to help other people, and your problem solving muscles are so strong that you just take on all their problems, and then you can't take vacation. And I understand you just went on your honeymoon, which is super exciting. You were able to do that most likely because you were able to step away and not keep solving other people's problems for them. So often we see managers and leaders just burnt out and feeling lonely and frustrated because they're like, oh, I have to do everything myself. No one has the capacity to do this. No one has the capability. No one has the motivation. So it's about building their problem solving muscles, giving them power through those questions. And then the last thing is you named it as well. It's when you help people come to their own conclusions, come up with their own solutions, it earns commitment versus compliance. What research shows is that we are significantly more motivated by our own solutions than solutions someone assigns to us. And what that means is we're willing to persevere and get creative even in the face of obstacles. And in today's world, we're just littered with obstacles and uncertainty and ambiguity. So you really need to set people up to feel that commitment to this thing that they're solving versus just feeling like, oh, this solution was delegated to me. I'm not even sure why exactly we're doing it. So just that alone is this kind of treasure trove of insights around why Q-stepping, defaulting to questions and asking more questions than you're used to asking is so crucial to a manager and a leader's effectiveness. And I keep going, but I've talked a lot. So
we need to move on to another one. I want to throw out one more, though, that I love this term Q-step. If you back off and ask a question, also it allows you more time to think and figure out what you're really going to say. So
absolutely.
It's a way of pausing the conversation almost. Let's move on to the next one. Feedback skills.
Yeah. Okay. So feedback, I will say, first and foremost, most people kind of aren't even sure what feedback means. I just taught a feedback workshop recently and people were like, isn't feedback just telling people what to do differently? Actually, no. Feedback, I think of as, if you think of coaching as like helping people unearth and create insight out of what's already inside their own minds. You're not giving them new information. You're helping them through your questions come to their own solutions, come to their own conclusions. Feedback, it's like holding a mirror to the person and showing them, hey, this is what you're doing and here's the impact of that. Both positive and negative, depending on what the impact is. So number one, it's just recognizing what feedback is. Feedback is there to teach us, to give us tools to teach one another, to be better collaborators, to more quickly adjust, to more quickly learn by holding up this mirror that says, hey, here's what you're doing, here's the impact that you're having. So A few kind of quick tips on giving feedback really well. Number one, what we find is that people who are really good at giving feedback start with something we call a micro yes. What that means is essentially instead of saying, "Hey Jim, I've got some feedback for you," I go, "Hey, I have some feedback on how that last show went. Would you like to hear it? Or when would be a good time to talk? Would you be open to it?" You're essentially asking for permission and consent to have that conversation. You're not saying, by the way, "Hey, can we talk?" No one likes that. Our brains freak out when we hear something that blurry, but it's this little entryway into the conversation. That is so important because it calms the brain's defensiveness. We have these parts of our brain called the amygdala, which are constantly monitoring threat. One of the reasons, especially critical feedback, but also positive feedback to some extent, can be so difficult to hear is that our brain goes, "You're threatening my sense of identity or my sense of safety, and I can't hear you. I can't learn right now because I'm too busy protecting myself." So that micro yes alone is so brilliant and so small, like a small change that has a big impact because it gives the other individual both power to decide whether or when to have the conversation and preparation. So I can go into that conversation going, "Oh, okay, I know what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about that last meeting or that last show or that comment that I made." So number one is micro yes. I can keep going, but let me pause there.
Yeah, let's move on. I want to move on to some of the other skills because we are running out of time. Productivity skills.
Okay, I'll just give you one from the productivity workshop or chapter, depending on how you're following this along. We call this the MIT Most Important Things technique. The most, probably if you're going to do nothing else to improve your productivity, is to start the day, and you can also do this for the month, the quarter, the year, however you want to chunk it, asking yourself, what are the most important things? What we find is that the most productive people, first and foremost, are really, really good at differentiating the important from the less important. And so just starting your day with, "Hey, if I were successful today, if I spent my time well, what would be the most important things?" And then as a leader or as a manager, making sure there's alignment around the MITs is one of the most critical things that you can do. So that's my top tip from productivity.
All right. Effective one-on-ones.
All right. So effective one-on-ones, I will share, what's a quick nugget from that workshop? I guess main thing I will say is just the research that shows that behaviorally, like in terms of not just what you say, but what you do, what actions you take, one of the best predictors of effectiveness for a team is a manager who has regularly scheduled one-on-ones with their team. So ideally that's weekly, at most in terms of delay, once every other week. If it's any longer than that, then it doesn't seem to have benefit. But there's something really powerful about, think about how quickly we're moving, how quickly things are changing. If we have those quick touch points to just pause and focus on what does the individual that as a leader I am supporting, what do they need from me? How are they feeling? How are they doing? Have I helped them figure out what's most important? Have I asked them questions? Have I asked for feedback and given them feedback? It's one of those habits or rituals that just unleashes this really rapid ability to pivot, to adapt, to improve. And maybe I'll stop there because what we don't recommend is like dumping too much knowledge or too many tools or too many skills into people's minds.
People can only remember one.
Yeah, exactly. So should I do Q-Step? Should I do MITs? I would say of all the things we talked about, Q-Step, Deblur, micro yes, MITs, and one-on-ones, pick one of those. If you're listening and you're like, yeah, this is resonating with me, pick one of those and start doing it. And then re-listen to this episode and try others or buy the book or sign up for our workshops and do others. But start with one, because I think that's where people get really hung up on and overwhelmed in improving something that feels so nebulous. It just start with one, just like any other habit, and you'll get to see the benefit of it really quickly.
I don't see anything on here about receiving skills or criticism or anything like that. I don't see where we talk about getting fired by the board or anything like that. How do I learn to receive criticism from, say, the media or my chairman or the board of directors or something like that.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, you're right. That is not in the book. What I can share with you in terms of what we've seen is that it still is the same kind of behavioral units. So the kind of 3-part formula I would suggest anytime you're hearing feedback is, number one, play it back. So kind of like you said, questions give you a moment to really think and process. You most likely don't want to just blurt out whatever thing comes to your mind first. That amygdala that I was talking about, in psychology, we call it an amygdala hijacking. That's when the amygdala takes over your brain. It makes it impossible for you to really think logically and calmly about the situation. So first thing you want to do is play it back. A playback is something like, okay, so it sounds like you're saying that I'm no longer fit for this organization. Is that right? And you literally just, summarize what you've understood. Not only will that give you a little bit of time to cool off, it also checks for alignment. And it gives the individual, like you said earlier, you ask those questions and people feel heard and seen. It gives them the sense that, okay, you're hearing me, you're taking this seriously. So the conversation is much more likely to go well. Now, after you've done that, you have to have the self-knowledge to go, am I capable of having this conversation right now or not? If you are not, it is perfectly okay in almost all scenarios to go, okay, I've heard you. I don't feel that, or I want to show up for this conversation thoughtfully and with good questions. May I have, a 5-minute break, or could I sleep on this and we come back to it tomorrow? A break is, we call it pausing skills. That's actually one of the behavioral units that we noticed. In this rapid world we're in, everything in our environment pushes us forward to just run. But actually, when you look at successful influencers, collaborators, and even romantic relationships, there's a psychologist named John Gottman who studies this. They have really, really great pausing skills. So you play it back. Okay, heard you say this. Did I get that right? You ask for the pause. Again, it's up to you and the situation what pause is useful. And then you go back to, now I'm going to ask some clarifying questions. This is truly just for truth seeking. There's a concept called the second score, which is the feedback that someone is giving you. They've already given you a first score, which is they've already given you a score based on how they've perceived you. Now they're giving you a second score in terms of how well they believe you take their feedback. So now it's time to earn that really high second score, regardless of what your first score was. And it starts with, now I'm going to speak the truth. So I'm going to ask questions to try to understand. So just so I can understand where you're coming from, you mentioned that you don't feel that I have the competence to do this. I want to understand so that I can improve, or I want to understand so that I can help come up with a solution. Would you share examples of that? What do you see as the impact of that? Whatever you need to sort of really understand the situation. So no defensiveness until you've gathered that information. Then you go into kind of exploration. So I think about playback is like, get on the same page and then ask questions. That's to go back in time so that you can understand how they got to their conclusions. And then you go forward into the future and you start exploring solutions. So you can go, okay, so either I have some ideas for how to address this, or I have a small experiment I suggest we try, or I'm struggling to apply this feedback. Can you give me some suggestions or examples of how you think this problem could be fixed? And of course, another option is to go, I don't agree with this feedback. Is there a way we could together come up with a way to test this hypothesis? Like, could we ask for feedback from others? Could we A/B test it, to see which approach is most effective? But no matter what, start with that playback and then those clarifying questions, and give yourself the pause to be able to show up to that conversation well.
The book is The Leader Lab, Core Skills to Become a Great Manager Faster. The author, Tania Luna. Tania, how do you want us to find out more? Follow you online, all that, please.
Yes. So you can check out the company where we do training for managers, leaders, and teams. It's called LifeLabs Learning. You can go to lifelabslearning.com. And you can check out my podcast. It's called Talk Psych to Me.
Fantastic. Tania, thank you so much for being with us. Great stuff, great book, and congratulations. This is one I'm going to need to buy.
Thank you very much. I'll give you a discount.
That'd be nice. And I appreciate everyone being with us today. We are out of time, but we will be back tomorrow. Be safe, everyone. Bye now.